The music program is being cut next month. Principal Dorothy Martinez had to break the devastating news to her students at Lincoln Elementary, watching as the hope drained from 24 young faces who had just discovered that their one creative outlet was being eliminated due to budget constraints. The inner-city school had been struggling for years, but the latest round of funding cuts meant that non-essential programs like music education were the first to go. These children, many from single-parent households where money was always tight, had found joy and purpose in their weekly choir practice, only to learn that even this small dream was too expensive for their community to sustain. What these children and their principal didn't know was that Elvis Presley was walking past their school at that exact moment, drawn by the sound of young voices that were about to be silenced forever by a system that measured value in dollars rather than dreams. And he was about to prove that sometimes the most important investments can't be calculated on a budget spreadsheet. Lincoln Elementary sat in one of Memphis's most challenging neighborhoods, where cracked sidewalks and boarded-up storefronts told the story of economic decline and forgotten promises. The school served 400 children from families where both parents working multiple jobs was often not enough to cover basic expenses, where dreams were luxury items that most households couldn't afford to purchase. Principal Dorothy Martinez had been fighting this battle for 5 years, watching talented children slip through cracks created by insufficient funding and societal indifference. She had seen kids with extraordinary potential in mathematics never get the chance to take advanced courses. She had watched natural athletes never learn to swim because the school couldn't maintain a pool. And now she was about to lose the one program that had brought consistent joy and hope to her students' lives. The music program at Lincoln Elementary existed because of Mrs. Sarah Thompson, a retired music teacher who had been volunteering her time for 3 years after witnessing the stark inequality between her former suburban school and the inner-city institutions that served Memphis's most vulnerable children. Mrs. Thompson had watched children at wealthy schools take private piano lessons for granted while equally talented kids at Lincoln Elementary had never touched a real instrument. The 24 children in the choir represented the diversity of their community. There was Keisha Washington, 8 years old, whose voice carried the emotional depth of someone who had already learned that life wasn't always fair. Marcus Johnson, 10, whose natural rhythm and pitch made him seem like he was born to make music. Lisa Rodriguez, 9, who could harmonize with any melody after hearing it just once. Deshaun Williams, 11, whose deep bass voice was remarkable for his age and suggested a future in professional music if he ever got the chance to develop his talent. These children came from families where music education was not a priority because survival took precedence over enrichment. Their parents worked as housekeepers, construction workers, restaurant servers, and security guards, jobs that provided barely enough income to cover rent, food, and utilities, leaving nothing for music lessons or instruments. But despite their economic circumstances, these children possessed something that money couldn't buy: raw musical talent that expressed itself in every song they sang together. Their voices blended with a natural harmony that music teachers in expensive private schools spent years trying to develop in their students. They created rhythm with nothing but their hands and feet. They improvised melodies that would have impressed professional composers. Mrs. Thompson had nurtured this talent for 3 years, teaching them to read basic music notation using photocopied sheets because the school couldn't afford textbooks. She had led them in creating their own songbook of spirituals, pop songs, and original compositions that reflected their experiences and hopes. She had helped them discover that music could be a powerful form of expression and communication that transcended their economic limitations. The children's favorite time of the week was Thursday afternoon choir practice, when they gathered in the empty classroom that served as their makeshift music room. They would push the desks against the walls and stand in formation, their voices filling the space with joy that seemed to temporarily erase the hardships they faced at home and in their community. They sang everything from traditional gospel songs that connected them to their cultural heritage to contemporary hits they heard on the radio. They performed at school assemblies, community events, and local churches, always receiving standing ovations from audiences who were amazed by the quality of music coming from children who had never received formal training. But their success was also their limitation. Without instruments, they couldn't accompany themselves. Without formal training, they couldn't read complex music or develop technical skills that would prepare them for advanced musical education. Without resources, they couldn't record their music or compete with school programs that had professional-level equipment and instruction. Mrs. Thompson had tried everything to secure funding for instruments and formal music education. She had written grant applications that were rejected because Lincoln Elementary didn't have matching funds. She had organized fundraisers that raised small amounts but never enough to purchase quality instruments. She had reached out to local businesses and community organizations, most of whom expressed sympathy but couldn't provide the financial support needed to build a real music program. The final blow came when the school district announced budget cuts that eliminated funding for all volunteer coordinator positions. Mrs. Thompson's small stipend for supplies and transportation was being eliminated, and the school administration couldn't justify maintaining a music program without any official budget allocation. Principal Martinez had postponed this conversation as long as possible, hoping for a miracle that would save the program. But with 3 weeks left in the school year and budget decisions finalized for the following year, she could no longer avoid telling the children that their choir would be disbanded permanently. As she delivered the news, she watched the children process the information with the resilience that came from living with disappointment as a constant companion. Some children nodded with the resignation of people who had learned not to expect good things to last. Others asked practical questions about whether they could continue meeting informally, not understanding that without institutional support, even volunteer programs couldn't survive. But Principal Martinez also saw something else in their faces, a quiet determination that suggested these children weren't ready to let their musical dreams die without a fight. They had found something precious in their Thursday afternoon gatherings, something that had given them confidence, joy, and a sense of possibility that extended far beyond music. That's when 8-year-old Keisha Washington raised her hand with a question that would change everything. "Principal Martinez," she said in her clear, strong voice, "can we sing one more song before we stop forever?" Principal Martinez felt her throat tighten as she nodded. The children moved naturally into their formation, and without any discussion about what to sing, they began a rendition of Amazing Grace that transformed the ordinary classroom into something sacred. Their voices, unaccompanied by any instruments, created harmony that seemed impossible for children who had never had formal training. Keisha's pure soprano led the melody while Marcus provided a bass line that anchored the song. Lisa and Deshawn wove intricate harmonies around the main theme, and the other children filled in with parts that they had learned through 3 years of listening and practicing together. As they sang, their voices carried through the open windows and out into the street, where people stopped to listen. The beauty of their sound was undeniable, the emotion in their performance was authentic, and the tragedy of what was about to be lost was heartbreaking. Elvis Presley had been walking through the neighborhood, something he did occasionally when he needed to reconnect with the community that had shaped his early life and musical development. He was drawn by the sound of voices that reminded him of the gospel music he had grown up hearing in Memphis churches, but there was something special about this particular choir that made him stop and listen more carefully. As he approached Lincoln Elementary, Elvis realized that he was hearing children sing with the same passion and authenticity that had characterized the best music of his own career. These weren't trained voices performing practiced pieces, these were young people expressing something real and powerful through music that came from their hearts rather than their formal education. When the song ended, Elvis heard the sound of children talking excitedly, their voices carrying the mixture of sadness and determination that comes with saying goodbye to something important. He walked closer to the school building, drawn by curiosity about what kind of program could produce such remarkable music from what appeared to be an underfunded inner-city school. Through the open window, he heard Principal Martinez explaining to the children that this was their final choir practice, that budget cuts had made it impossible to continue the program, and that they should be proud of what they had accomplished together over the past 3 years. Elvis also heard Mrs. Thompson's voice, thick with emotion, as she thanked the children for the joy they had brought to her life and encouraged them to continue singing, even if they couldn't meet as a group anymore. She told them that their voices were gifts that should never be silenced, regardless of their economic circumstances. But most importantly, Elvis heard the children's responses to this devastating news. Instead of complaints or tears, he heard them talking about how much the choir had meant to them, sharing memories of their favorite songs and performances, and making promises to each other about staying connected through music even after the official program ended. One child's voice stood out above the others, Marcus Johnson, whose mature bass voice asked a question that revealed both wisdom and heartbreak. Mrs. Thompson, what happens to kids like us who want to be musicians but can't afford to learn? The question hung in the air like a challenge to every adult who had ever decided that music education was a luxury rather than a necessity, that some children deserved opportunities while others deserved only the basics required for survival. Elvis felt something shift inside him as he listened to this conversation. He had been blessed with natural talent, but he had also been given opportunities to develop that talent through informal mentorship, community support, and eventually professional guidance. These children had the talent, but they were being denied the opportunities that could help them develop their gifts. Without fully thinking through the implications of what he was about to do, Elvis walked to the school's main entrance and asked to speak with Principal Martinez. When she came to meet him, clearly surprised to see Elvis Presley in her school, he explained that he had heard the children singing and wanted to learn more about their music program. Principal Martinez, still emotional from the conversation with her students, found herself telling Elvis the complete story of their situation. She explained about Mrs. Thompson's volunteer work, the children's natural talent, the budget cuts that were eliminating the program, and the heartbreak of watching talented children lose their only connection to formal musical education. Elvis listened carefully, asking questions that revealed his understanding of both the technical aspects of music education and the economic realities facing inner-city schools. He wanted to know about the children's backgrounds, their levels of talent, their dreams for the future, and the specific resources that would be needed to create a sustainable music program. Would it be possible for me to meet with the children and Mrs. Thompson? Elvis asked. I'd like to hear them sing and talk with them about music. 20 minutes later, Elvis found himself in the makeshift music room at Lincoln Elementary, surrounded by 24 children whose faces showed mixtures of excitement, disbelief, and hope. These kids had grown up listening to Elvis's music on the radio, but none of them had ever imagined meeting him in person, especially not in their own school. Mrs. Thompson, equally amazed by the situation, introduced Elvis to the choir and explained that he had heard them singing and wanted to learn more about their program. The children, initially shy, gradually warmed to Elvis's genuine interest in their music and their stories. I heard y'all singing Amazing Grace, Elvis said, and it was about the most beautiful thing I've heard in a long time. How long have you been singing together? The children took turns explaining their choir experience, talking about their favorite songs, sharing memories of performances, and describing what music meant to them. Their answers revealed not just talent, but depth of feeling and understanding about music's power to bring joy, comfort, and community connection. Elvis asked them to sing another song, and they chose This Little Light of Mine, a spiritual that allowed each child to showcase their individual vocal abilities while contributing to the group harmony. As they sang, Elvis recognized that he was witnessing something extraordinary, not just talented children, but young people who understood music's emotional and spiritual dimensions in ways that many professionally trained musicians never achieved. After they finished, Elvis asked a question that would change their lives forever. What would you do if you could have any musical instruments you wanted? The children's eyes lit up as they shared their dreams. Keisha wanted to learn piano so she could accompany the choir. Marcus dreamed of playing drums and creating the rhythmic foundation for their songs. Lisa was fascinated by violins and wondered if she could learn to play melody lines that would enhance their vocal harmonies. Deshawn wanted to try guitar and maybe write songs that reflected their community's experiences. And what would you do if you could have a real music teacher who could help you develop your talents? Elvis continued. Mrs. Thompson smiled through her tears as the children described their hopes for learning to read complex music notation, understanding music theory, developing proper vocal technique, and maybe even performing with professional musicians someday. Elvis turned to Principal Martinez and Mrs. Thompson. What would it take to create a real music program here? Not just choir practice, but a comprehensive program that could give these children the same opportunities that kids in wealthy schools take for granted. Principal Martinez, hardly believing what she was hearing, explained that a full program would require instruments for each child, music stands, sound equipment, sheet music, and salary for a qualified teacher. The total cost would be approximately $15,000 for startup equipment and $30,000 annually for instruction and ongoing supplies. Elvis nodded thoughtfully. And if these children had those resources, what kind of opportunities might be available to them in the future? Mrs. Thompson, energized by the possibility of what Elvis might be suggesting, explained how musical education could open doors to scholarships, college programs, professional opportunities, and lifelong enjoyment and expression. She talked about how music training developed discipline, creativity, teamwork, and confidence that benefited children in all areas of their lives. What Elvis announced next would transform not just these 24 children's lives, but the entire approach to music education in underfunded schools across America. "I'd like to help you build that program," Elvis said simply. "Not just with money, but with ongoing support to make sure these children get the musical education they deserve." The room erupted in excitement as children and adults alike realized that their musical dreams were not ending but beginning. Elvis spent the next 2 hours with the choir, learning their names, hearing their individual stories, and beginning to understand the full scope of what could be accomplished with proper resources and support. Over the following weeks, Elvis worked with Principal Martinez and Mrs. Thompson to design a comprehensive music education program for Lincoln Elementary. He purchased high-quality instruments, appropriate for each child's interests and abilities. He arranged for Mrs. Thompson to receive proper compensation for her work and additional training to enhance her teaching skills. He equipped the school with a proper music room, complete with piano, sound system, recording equipment, and extensive library of sheet music. But Elvis's most important contribution was his ongoing personal involvement in the program. He visited the school regularly, not as a celebrity making token appearances, but as a mentor who was genuinely invested in each child's musical development. He listened to their progress, offered encouragement during difficult learning periods, and provided guidance based on his own professional experience. The transformation in the children was remarkable. With proper instruments and instruction, their natural talents flourished in ways that amazed even Mrs. Thompson. Keisha became an accomplished pianist who could accompany not just the choir but other school performances. Marcus developed into a skilled drummer whose rhythmic sense became the foundation for the group's increasingly sophisticated arrangements. Lisa's violin skills progressed so rapidly that she was invited to audition for the Memphis Youth Symphony Orchestra, becoming the first student from Lincoln Elementary ever to participate in the prestigious program. Deshawn not only learned guitar, but began composing songs that reflected the experiences and hopes of his community, creating music that bridged the gap between professional artistry and authentic personal expression. The success of individual students was impressive, but the impact on the school and community was even more significant. The Lincoln Elementary Choir began performing at venues throughout Memphis, always receiving standing ovations and media attention that showcased the extraordinary talent that existed in underserved communities when children were given proper support and resources. Their performances attracted the attention of other musicians, educators, and community leaders who had never realized the level of talent that existed in inner-city schools. Record producers began visiting Lincoln Elementary to hear the children perform. Music educators from universities offered to provide additional training and support. Community organizations started funding similar programs in other underfunded schools. Elvis used his platform and connections to create opportunities for the children that extended far beyond their elementary school experience. He arranged for them to record an album that showcased their voices and highlighted the importance of music education for all children. He organized concerts that featured the Lincoln Elementary Choir alongside professional musicians, demonstrating that talent and artistic excellence were not limited by economic circumstances. Most importantly, Elvis established the Every Child Deserves Music Foundation, which provided ongoing support for music education in underfunded schools across the country. The foundation's mission was based on what Elvis had learned from the children at Lincoln Elementary, that musical talent exists in every community, but opportunity does not. The foundation worked to identify schools where talented children lacked access to music education, providing them with instruments, teacher training, and ongoing support. Within 5 years, the program was operating in more than 50 schools across the South, serving thousands of children who might otherwise never have had the chance to develop their musical abilities. The academic research that emerged from studying these programs provided compelling evidence for music education's benefits beyond artistic development. Students who participated in comprehensive music programs showed improved performance in mathematics, reading, and critical thinking skills. They demonstrated higher levels of self-confidence, better social interaction abilities, and increased likelihood of pursuing higher education. The success of the Every Child Deserves Music programs influenced public policy discussions about educational equity and resource allocation. Legislators began to recognize that arts education was not a luxury but a necessity that provided benefits to individual students and entire communities. Today, more than 4 decades after Elvis heard those 24 voices singing Amazing Grace through an open window at Lincoln Elementary, the program continues to operate and expand. Hundreds of the children who participated in Elvis-funded music education programs have gone on to successful careers in music education, business, and community leadership. Keisha Washington became a professional pianist and music educator who has taught thousands of children in underserved communities. Marcus Johnson developed into a successful studio musician and producer who works with artists across multiple genres. Lisa Rodriguez earned a scholarship to study violin at Juilliard and now performs with major orchestras while teaching at inner-city schools. Deshaun Williams became a songwriter and performer whose music continues to bridge the gap between professional artistry and authentic community expression. But perhaps more importantly, these individuals and hundreds like them became advocates for educational equity and community investment. They used their success to create opportunities for the next generation of talented children who might otherwise be overlooked by systems that measure value in budget spreadsheets rather than human potential. The lesson of Lincoln Elementary's music program continues to resonate with educators, policymakers, and community leaders who understand that talent is distributed equally but opportunity is not. The story of 24 children whose voices almost were silenced by budget cuts reminds us that the most important investments in our society often can't be measured in financial terms, but their returns last forever. Because sometimes the most valuable things in life, talent, hope, dreams, and the human spirit can't be cut from a budget without losing something essential about who we are and who we might become. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, someone with the power to make a difference will hear those voices that society has decided aren't worth supporting, and prove that every child deserves the chance to let their light shine. Sarah Chen from Vanderbilt University conducted comprehensive studies following Lincoln Elementary students over 3 decades. Her research documented remarkable outcomes. Students showed 34% higher high school graduation rates and 42% higher college enrollment compared to similar schools without music programs. The neurological research revealed that musical training literally rewired developing brains in ways that enhanced learning capacity. Children who learned to play instruments showed improved working memory, faster processing speeds, and better ability to focus attention. Brain imaging studies using MRI technology showed that children who received consistent music instruction developed enhanced neural connections associated with executive function, language processing, and mathematical reasoning. Dr. Chen's most significant finding involved what she termed the confidence cascade effect. Children who learned to perform music in front of audiences developed public speaking abilities, leadership skills, and academic self-efficacy that influenced their success across all subject areas. Teachers reported that former music program participants were more likely to volunteer for classroom presentations, run for student government, and participate in academic competitions. The research demonstrated that music education was particularly beneficial for children from disadvantaged backgrounds, helping to mitigate some of the negative effects of poverty and trauma on brain development. Students who participated in high-quality music programs showed academic gains that helped close achievement gaps between different socioeconomic groups. Medical researchers discovered that children who participated in music education programs showed reduced rates of anxiety, depression, and attention deficit disorders. Pediatric hospitals began incorporating music education into treatment protocols for children with various medical conditions. Cancer patients who participated in music therapy showed reduced anxiety, better pain management, and improved immune function. The foundation developed specialized curricula for children dealing with trauma, including those who had experienced abuse, neglect, or community violence. Music provided a safe outlet for expressing difficult emotions and processing traumatic experiences. Children learned coping strategies, built self-esteem, and developed resilience through creative expression and community support. Pharmaceutical companies began funding music education research after discovering that children in comprehensive music programs required significantly fewer prescriptions for attention deficit medications, antidepressants, and anxiety treatments. The potential healthcare cost savings from music education programs reached billions of dollars annually, providing compelling economic arguments for program expansion. The Lincoln Elementary model attracted international attention. Japan implemented community harmony programs combining traditional instruments with contemporary techniques. The Ministry of Education sent delegations to Memphis to study program implementation, leading to modified versions in Tokyo, Osaka, and Yokohama that reported similar improvements in student engagement and academic performance. Brazil established music programs in favelas, showing significant reductions in youth crime rates. The Brazilian government incorporated elements of the Every Child Deserves Music approach into their national education policy, establishing music programs in rural communities where children previously had no access to arts education. Within a decade, Brazil's youth orchestra program became internationally recognized, with many participants earning scholarships to study at prestigious conservatories in Europe and North America. In post-apartheid South Africa, the model helped bridge cultural divisions while preserving diverse musical traditions. Students learned traditional African instruments and songs alongside Western classical and contemporary popular music. Programs emphasized collaboration between different ethnic and linguistic groups, helping build national unity while celebrating cultural diversity. The European Union adopted the Memphis Protocol for arts education across member countries. The protocol provided guidelines for teacher training, resource allocation, and program evaluation, while allowing individual countries to adapt approaches to their specific cultural contexts and educational systems. Over 50 European cities established programs directly modeled on Lincoln Elementary's approach. UNESCO officially endorsed the Memphis approach as a best practice for educational equity, recommending its implementation in developing nations struggling with educational resource allocation. The organization's 2019 report titled Music as a Gateway to Academic Excellence cited the Lincoln Elementary program as evidence that arts education was not supplementary to academic achievement but foundational to it. The documented success of music education programs influenced public policy at local, state, and federal levels. The Every Student Succeeds Act included unprecedented support for arts education, with specific funding streams dedicated to music and creative arts programs. The legislation required states to include arts education in their accountability systems and provided resources for teacher training, equipment purchases, and program evaluation. Senator Keisha Washington, the former 8-year-old choir member who had become a prominent political leader, championed the Universal Arts Education Act, which established federal standards for music and arts instruction in all public schools. The legislation required states to provide arts education funding comparable to other core subjects, ending the practice of treating music and art as expendable luxuries. State education departments developed new standards and assessment systems that recognized the importance of creativity, collaboration, and cultural understanding alongside traditional academic subjects. Professional development requirements for teachers and administrators included training in arts integration and community engagement strategies. Teacher certification programs began requiring coursework in music education and arts integration, ensuring that all educators understood how to support creative development even if they were not specialized music teachers. School principals were required to demonstrate competency in building and sustaining arts programs as part of their professional certification. Federal funding for education research increasingly supported studies of arts education effectiveness, leading to a substantial evidence base that informed policy decisions and program design. The National Science Foundation established special funding categories for research on creativity, artistic development, and the integration of arts and sciences in educational settings. As technology evolved, the Every Child Deserves Music Foundation adapted its methods while maintaining core principles. In 2010, they launched the Digital Harmony Project, providing tablets loaded with music composition software to students who wanted to create original music but lacked traditional instruments. Former Lincoln Elementary student David Martinez, who had become a software engineer, developed the virtual orchestra application that allowed students from different schools to collaborate on musical projects remotely. During the COVID-19 pandemic, this technology proved essential for maintaining music education when in-person instruction was impossible. The foundation partnered with major streaming platforms to create Young Voices Rising, a digital showcase for student compositions and performances. The platform not only provided audience exposure for young musicians but generated revenue that was reinvested in music education programs. Several students gained significant followings, leading to scholarship opportunities and professional recording contracts. Mobile applications made music education accessible to students who lacked access to traditional instruments or formal instruction. Apps taught rhythm, melody, harmony, and composition using gamification techniques that maintained student engagement while building serious musical skills. The applications worked on low-cost devices and functioned even with limited internet connectivity. Virtual reality applications allowed students to experience different musical cultures and performance venues. They could visit concert halls, recording studios, and cultural sites that would otherwise be inaccessible due to geographic or economic barriers. VR programs included historical recreations that taught students about musical traditions and the social contexts that shaped different genres. The success of comprehensive music education programs contributed to broader economic development in communities that had previously struggled with disinvestment and limited opportunities. Neighborhoods with strong school music programs experienced increased property values, new business development, and improved public safety outcomes. The Memphis Music Education District became a model for using cultural assets to drive economic growth. The city offered tax incentives to businesses that supported school music programs, leading to the relocation of record labels, instrument manufacturers, and entertainment technology companies. These businesses created thousands of jobs and generated millions in tax revenue that was reinvested in educational and community development initiatives. Cultural tourism increased significantly as visitors came to experience the birthplace of the Elvis model for music education. The Graceland Museum's Every Child Deserves Music exhibit attracted international attention and generated substantial revenue for the local economy. Music education conferences and workshops brought educators from around the world to Memphis, further boosting tourism and establishing the city as a global center for innovative educational approaches. Local universities expanded their music education programs to meet growing demand for qualified teachers. The University of Memphis established the Elvis Presley Institute for Music Education, which became the premier training center for educators specializing in community-based music instruction. Graduates were recruited by school districts nationwide, spreading Memphis-trained teachers and methodologies across the country. Keisha Washington became a professional pianist and music educator who developed the Healing Harmonies curriculum, integrating music therapy techniques into traditional music education. Her research demonstrated that children who learned to express emotions through music showed 40% fewer behavioral problems and 35% higher academic achievement scores. She established the Keisha Washington Institute for Music-Based Learning, which has trained over 8,000 teachers in trauma-informed music education techniques. Marcus Johnson developed into Nashville's most sought-after session drummers, working with artists including Alicia Keys, Keith Urban and John Legend. He invested his earnings in establishing community recording studios in underserved neighborhoods and created the Marcus Johnson Mobile Music Labs that brought professional recording equipment directly to schools lacking resources for comprehensive music programs. Lisa Rodriguez became concertmaster of the San Francisco Symphony at age 26. She developed community strings, a revolutionary teaching method that adapted classical violin instruction for students without access to private lessons or expensive instruments. Her technique allowed students to play recognizable melodies within their first lesson while building technical skills progressively. Deshaun Williams became a voice for social justice through music, with his album Voices from the Neighborhood becoming a grassroots phenomenon. His song Lincoln Elementary Blues became an anthem for students fighting budget cuts to arts programs and was performed at congressional hearings on education funding. These individuals and hundreds like them became advocates for educational equity and community investment, using their success to create opportunities for the next generation of talented children who might otherwise be overlooked by systems that measure value in budget spreadsheets rather than human potential. Modern implementations of comprehensive music education faced new challenges requiring innovative solutions while maintaining core principles of equity, quality, and community engagement. Economic pressures, changing demographics, and evolving technology created obstacles that earlier programs had not encountered. Gentrification presented complex challenges as neighborhoods with successful music programs experienced rapid property value increases that sometimes displaced the very families these programs were designed to serve. The foundation worked with housing advocates and urban planners to develop strategies that preserved community character while supporting educational improvements. The digital divide created new forms of educational inequality as music programs increasingly relied on technology for instruction, composition, and collaboration. Students without reliable internet access or modern devices were at significant disadvantages. The foundation established community technology centers and device lending programs, partnering with telecommunications companies to provide discounted internet access to participating families. Teacher shortages in music education required creative approaches to staffing and instruction. The foundation developed distance learning programs that connected expert instructors with multiple schools simultaneously. Retired teachers were recruited as mentors and part-time instructors, while community musicians were trained as classroom assistants and specialized instructors. Urban gentrification presented unexpected complications as property values increased in neighborhoods with successful new programs, sometimes displacing the very families these programs were designed to serve. Community land trusts were established to ensure that longtime residents could remain in neighborhoods even as property values increased. Today, programs modeled on Lincoln Elementary operate in 2,847 schools across 63 countries, serving over 800,000 students annually. The Every Child Deserves Music Foundation continues expanding, with Dr. Keisha Washington Chen as president, operated the same 8-year-old girl who asked to sing one more song before the program ended. The foundation's current 5-year strategic plan includes ambitious goals for reaching underserved populations in rural areas, refugee communities and regions affected by conflict or natural disasters. Mobile music labs, satellite internet connections, and partnerships with humanitarian organizations are extending program reach to children who have never before had access to formal music education. The original Lincoln Elementary still houses an active music program now serving its fifth generation. A bronze statue of Elvis stands in the school garden with the inscription, "He heard the sound of dreams and decided they were worth fighting for." Because that's what Elvis understood on that spring afternoon in Memphis when he chose to step through a school's front door instead of walking past, that the most profound changes in the world begin with the simple decision to listen to voices that others have decided don't matter, and to prove through action that every child's light deserves the chance to shine as brightly as possible.